Calling all beings. Calling all beings.
Hi everyone, it's me and Courtney. Courtney, you gonna say hello?
Hey, welcome back to Tab. Deb and I are co-hosting tonight. I'm so excited.
Right, so we wanted to have a chat, have a conversation with some really cool co-hosts of their own show, Elephant in the Room. And without further ado, we would like to talk to them. Please bring them to the stage.
Hey guys.
Yeah. DJ's hanging in the background today. He's a little busy. And Courtney's on the road. So it's an interesting day today. But so can you guys tell us a little bit about your show?
Ariel, why don't you start?
Oh my goodness, I knew you were going to do that. Yeah, no, of course. So I was kind of in the UFO Twitter space for a while, and Krys was too. And I had kind of dabbled off and on with my own sort of YouTube channel. I'd done a little bit of blogging here and there, just about the topic. And from there, I was just sort of feeling stuck, and I wasn't sure, what I was going to do next and where my journey was going to take me. And then out of the blue one day, Krys DMs me and basically just said, "Hey, I have a crazy idea. How about you and I start a podcast?" And I was like, you know what? Yes, let's do it. And so we did not know each other at that point. And we hopped on Zoom like a week later just to kind of meet and greet and get to know each other. And we instantly knew, we're like, this is the vibe. We just had so much in common. There were synchronicities. And from there, we just kind of jumped in and we talk about UFOs. We talk about all other connecting aspects, consciousness, high strangeness, science, spirituality, you name it. There's just so many topics that are connected to the UFO phenomenon. So we just kind of like to cover it all. Although I will say that we do very much gravitate towards the actual UFO phenomenon. So yeah, Krys, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's exactly what happened. I just kind of, I don't know. I got back from Deb from DC, and it was shortly after that I just felt really like, okay, I want to do something. I don't know what I want to do, to be honest. And I just felt like, okay, this is something I can do. And I didn't want to do it alone. And I looked out, and I had been, obviously on Twitter for a long time. And I really felt a camaraderie with Ariel just through Twitter. And, honestly, I'm kind of a risk taker. So I reached out and we made the connection, and we just haven't looked back. Neither of us are, trying to like change the world or anything with our podcast. We're really, we want to, number one, learn from our guests, and it's kind of more of a exploration for ourselves, to be honest. And obviously we want to share that with the world, because when I say the world, whoever in our little world wants to listen. So that's kind of where we're at with the podcast. That's kind of what generated it.
Okay. Well, I just want to point out to those who do not know, Krys was at the hearing and I was there, and I got to meet Krys, and she has extremely positive energy. She's also done an interview with me before for UAP Med. So she's doing a lot more than the podcast. She was like feet on the ground, there at the hearing, meeting people, putting her information out to like get this progress that we were all hoping to have with this topic, right? So I don't know, Courtney, if Courtney's able to chime in or not. Courtney, is there something you wanted to ask? Okay,
She
I
might
swear.
be. Yeah.
Yeah, I swear Courtney's there. She'll be back. Okay, so okay, so the next thing I wanted to ask you guys about the show is in this exploration that you're doing together, what is sort of like standing out for you as something that people should be focusing on more? Like in this topic, like you mentioned consciousness, that one's sort of like, controversial for people, but what is like really like this is something we really need to dig into more.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is, I have not dug too far into the work of Jacques Vallée, but I'm just, I'm aware of what his, the brief overview at it. And, his idea is that we need to look broader and we need to try to find a way to account for all of the aspects of the UFO phenomenon that we sometimes brush aside, even things like, missing time, things like that, or just orbs or, entities and just high strangeness that often accompanies a quote unquote nuts and bolts sighting. We need to find a way to account for that. And, I know he's a proponent of the interdimensional theory, and he thinks that maybe that is something that can account for, grouping everything together. But I think that's something that some people tend to shy away from, is they want to just focus on the nuts and bolts. But once you really get into this topic, you realize that there's just so much more to it. And we can't just keep brushing that high strangeness stuff aside.
Yeah, I agree. I think I remember when I first got on UFO Twitter, it was like in 2021, and spaces were just starting, and we jump onto spaces, and I remember we would call it the woo back then. It was like no one wanted to talk about the woo, but a few of us wanted to like go there because their experiences included high strangeness. But now I do see it as more common as a topic that people are willing to engage. But I think from a scientific perspective, it's going to be very difficult for that shift to happen because of the scientific method, and it's very difficult to repeat, right, these types of events. But I mean, honestly, there's so much hope, I think. And I just saw that episode last night of Ross Coulthart. I don't know if you guys saw it, and I apologize because I don't know the man's name, but he had one of the scientists from Skinwalker Ranch, like the early, the BASS ASAP program Skinwalker Ranch guy on. And he talked about a study, and Courtney, you may be familiar with this, of like 600 patients where they've got correlation data from like 3 data points, and with personal devices these individuals wear, and record not only like biological like body response, but environmental response. And then they also have anecdotal experiences. So 3 out of thousands of patients, they only picked the ones that had these 3 data points, which they had several that had like 2 data points, which was still a strong, correlation, but they didn't accept that. So I'm just starting to see that there is more data out there than we were aware of, than has been made public. And those types of studies are taking into account the anecdotal data that identifies the high strangeness, the experiencer. They did a great case study there where they showed, this experiencer waking up and saying, oh my gosh, like if I was ever abducted, it was last night. And they were able to correlate it with the other 2 data points to like the second. It's just amazing what's starting to happen, I think, anyway.
That was Jim Segala's study, Krys. I think that you're talking about, and they did like a multiple prong approach where they gave the experiencers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I read through all the slides and everything and have been following the data that's come out from that. But what I thought was really novel in that research is they gave them like a personal device to take with them to work and also in their home. And one of the things that they found was there was 22 times the gamma ray signature out of their sensor data with the experiencer. So I thought that was really interesting. I didn't get to watch the recent video, but I really like the way the way they're collecting their data and how they're doing it. He did a really interesting study. So I'm waiting to hear more about it. I've asked a couple people who we've had on CAB about that data, and they've all just said, ask Jim. So I need to go to Jim and ask how he did the gamma ray collection, because that to me is the most interesting part so far.
Well, and it sounds like we can purchase this device from him. So I mean, I have no idea how much it is, but I was definitely tempted to look it up because, you know, like Jared on UFO Twitter, he's doing a project that incorporates different like EEG data. He's trying to study the same thing, and it's just like, well, there's already somebody out there doing some of this. This is really interesting, and it's yeah, I don't know. I just found that recent.
Who is that individual? Can you say his name again? Because I'm not sure I'm aware of him.
Diarbo, Dayarbo, I think, on Twitter.
Yeah, I've actually interviewed him as well.
Yeah, and he works Joel from the
Future folklore.
Future folklore incubator.
I got you, girl.
Thank you. There goes my name thing, my brain. But yeah, anyways, he's doing some early investigations in that manner. So yeah, it's just really interesting where it's going. So I agree, Ariel. That is something that it needs to be addressed. And from a multi-dimensional way, we need to approach the topic, because there's just too many fingers, too many areas it impacts, and we can't ignore the anecdotal and the, like you said, the woo data as well.
I think my favorite part about this, though, is like people try to say there's one side or the other, but it is 100% possible to merge them with things like that. And by the way, the device, there's one called the Muse. I know they're not sponsoring me, but it's on Amazon. I've seen mixed reviews about it, but supposedly it's like, you can just read your own brain waves at home. And I was fascinated by it. And when they did use something similar at Skinwalker Ranch on, I can't remember his name either. I have probably.
Chris Bledsoe.
Yes, thank you.
I'm surprised I remember it, only because I recently watched it.
They talked about the theta brainwave state, and the theta brainwave state is fascinating because that's the one where people have like these epiphanies of great ideas. It's also the one that's when people are meditating, they reach, or having deep prayer. So I feel like if we meditate or have deep prayer, we're going to have like these deep revelations if we access that theta brainwave state. So it is interesting how often, like when we put science to the woo, there's actually something underneath it that can be helpful to everyone. So yeah. I agree. It's cool.
Very much so.
So I wanted to ask, now that you guys have been underway with this exploration and you've identified some of the things that really need to be looked at, what still strikes you as just like really weird? Like what is just like too weird for you at this point, or like something that makes you go, whoa? Because sometimes we hit something that even I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole. But what is it that you guys are dealing with?
That's such a great question.
Yeah.
Ariel, do you have anything yet? Because I mean, to me, there's a few things.
I don't know, for me, time traveling humans gets me every time. Like when that theory is brought up, my brain, I don't know.
It breaks.
I feel like that would just fundamentally, because yes, visitors from another planet, absolutely, that would fundamentally change everything too. I'm not saying that wouldn't, be just crazy, but being able to travel time, I mean, that would change everything, and that would really just even change how we look at history in the past. I mean, it would just, I don't know, that just for me is something that is kind of blows my mind to think about when that theory gets brought up.
That's a really good one. Yeah, for me, I think the thing I personally struggle with the most is the sorry.
Oh no.
We understand.
Yeah, my dogs are
no big, no big deal.
Well, what about you guys? What's your strain? What's yours?
Oh, the non-corporal thing. There's the theory that NHI has gotten to the point where they don't need bodies.
Oh, yes.
That one freaks me out because actually, Courtney knows him. Dave Scott talked about these entities entering craft to navigate them. And that freaked me out because I don't want to get trapped in a craft having to navigate it after I pass away.
That's like, yeah, deep. Like, who thought of that?
Well,
Wow.
it doesn't seem like it wasn't implied that it was enslavement or anything like that, but that idea freaks me out. That's one that, like, if I go into that thought too much, I'm like, no, when I pass, I want to have some say in what I'm doing with my soul, you know. So
interesting.
I think the entities coming through the wall for me is one of the hardest, and it's, you know, it's falls in that whole body of work with abductions. And so I'm still, one of the hardest things for me to reconcile is abductions. And I know there's a lot of opinions about that. And even, you know, in Kit Green's one famous quote, he said, there are absolutely no abductions, right? And so that's one of the things that really gets to me, because I go into my, you know, dark thoughts at night, you know, when I'm going to bed wondering, well, what did he mean? You know, if there are no abductions. And I just saw a recent comment about it, a new take on it that I'm not ready to talk about yet, but I just was reading something as of yesterday that would kind of explain away the idea of abductions not being from the visitors, but being a whole nother kind of like corporeal phenomenon. So once I look at that and can kind of tease that apart a little bit, I'll be more ready to talk about it. I just don't feel as articulate right now because I'm just coming upon it. So anyway, yeah, abductions, the beings coming through the wall, having no control. That's one of my biggest problems.
I feel like that going through the wall thing touches on my thing, like the no body, like they're beyond bodies, they're at the next stage, which leads to something I brought up in a recent episode, probably the last one. What if all of us at some point are those entities and we just temporarily visit being in a body, and it like goes into a whole, like, see that the rabbit hole it leads to.
Yep.
Krys, you didn't answer this yet. Did you come up with some of?
Yeah. It's too hard for me to nail it down to one thing. I mean, it's not. It's interesting because I'm hearing what you guys are saying, and for whatever reason, they don't spark any like emotion in me, and I'm like, oh my god, what's wrong with me? Like, should I be terrified? Because I've thought about it a lot of times. Like, I just, as much as I totally believe that not only have I encountered aspects of the phenomenon, I just, there's something that still blocks me from thinking I will have some sort of entity experience. I don't know why, because I believe that they do happen. And I, you know, heard people out, you know, that I trust, that I think have had these experiences. But, I don't know. Maybe it's just this weird curiosity in me just to try and understand it more. Like it would be more of like, I mean, I'm sure I would be terrified. I'm sure I'd be horrified, but there's just this curiosity to understand it. So I don't, I think the worst case scenario would obviously be if they were, you know, a malevolent invasion of some sort would be, probably, because that's kind of what I dreamed about as a child before I was into this phenomenon. And I was terrified of them as children and as a child. And I didn't really have any other years between of really like connecting the dots. So I think that would probably be my biggest fear now that I think about it.
It is always interesting to me how often children report seeing something in their room and people brush it aside and say, "Oh, there's nothing there," and they go and they put the flashlight under the bed. This happened to me, by the way, because I was so scared about something being under my bed that I would jump to my bed. Right. So,
Yeah.
and I actually still don't like gnomes because I told my family that there were gnomes under my bed. And to this day, I don't get why there are gnomes everywhere. It's like, what is going on? Why do people have gnomes as decorations?
The
Like
cute little gnomes in people's lawns are like Deb's worst nightmare.
no,
Oh,
I mean,
darn it. Oh
I
no.
I don't know. I
But
have a
go ahead, Deb.
couple. I have a couple of those, like, but this is a different, like the little ones that are like squished, that are at, like, for instance, they're all over the Dollar Tree. They're all over the dollar store, right? Like, why are they a thing now for every
They
holiday?
are.
Well, I was just going to add on to what you said, Deb, that one of the things that really stood out to me when I read one of John Mack's books, I'm not exactly sure which one it is right now because it's been a long time ago, but he went into the children's cases. And one of the things that he said when he was talking about his abduction syndrome was that the kids were, most of them, their stories were very similar. That was one of the things that I liked his analysis on that. And then he also said a lot of them are too young to have like psychiatric disorders at that point in their life, like delusional disorders or other kinds of serious, psychiatric problems that they don't clinically. So that was the other thing about Mac's work that I really liked when he talked about the kids' cases and how it brought abduction syndrome into the light. So I'm not sure how many people have picked up on that, but I think the kids' studies that he did brought authenticity and validity into the field.
Right. So, I go back to what you said before about Kit Green saying they're not abductions. And I know you don't want to say what your new information on that is and new perspective, but let's pull this out for Ariel and Krys. Do you think, like, this is just my take on that? Maybe it's something else. Like, maybe it's not malevolent, sorry, but maybe it's like almost an agreement, a partnership or something, or maybe it's back to what I was saying with the rabbit hole. Like, this is just us. We're connecting back with ourselves, and like the body is just like a temporary thing. I don't know, man. The whole thing about that freaks me out. But what do you guys think?
Well, my view is a little out there, to be honest with you. But I tend to think when you say there's an agreement, I wonder if there's either an agreement with someone above our pay scale that, if that exists or not, about what they do with us, or I think, Deb, you're probably talking about like a personal agreement. Maybe that's the case. But is there a also, or is it just that, I know it's simple, but we're the lab rats, and even if they explained it to us and tried to express why maybe they're doing things, we would not have a concept or understanding or ability to comprehend. I mean, it could be malevolent. It could be for our own good. They could be studying our food supply, and why do they always study cattle? I think that's a curious thing. And I'm not saying it's okay, but I also think like we do that to our animals. We do it to our pets. We put them on tables, like we test them. We don't give them, they don't give consent. These are sentient beings, and we make that decision for them. Is that something that could be happening to us? Is just another question I have.
I'm like afraid to give them that role of being superior parentalified entities. You know what I mean? Like I don't like that one. And I'm not saying it's not the case. I'm just saying it makes me really uncomfortable when people talk about them being superior, and I'm like, just because someone has a better car, it doesn't make them better than me. I have to. So I just, it's like a self-righteousness comes out. What do you think, Ariel?
I tend to agree with you. I feel like, and I understand, but I don't necessarily. I see levels of sentience, and so we are much more sentient, self-aware than animals, and so like I guess maybe you could make the case that an evolved species is, you know, much more sentient than we are and could make decisions for us. However, I feel like with the self-awareness that we do have, that they would need to, like, we would need to give consent. I don't know. That's just kind of where I'm at with it.
Well, then there's the hypothesis that it's the MyLabs, that they're, they're overlaid, that there is possibly an HI contact or an encounter. And then, usually after that, there's, a MyLab. And, I have to be real honest and transparent and say that I didn't used to believe in MyLabs, because it was just too horrifying, I think, for me to actually believe that our own government might be abducting. But, once you start to look at all the studies and things that have been done unethically, you start to figure out real quick that it's very possible and also likely. And so I think that there's a compounded traumatic layer there when you're talking about NHI encounters potentially and what that's all about, but then also the MyLabs. So I have heard a lot from experiencers saying that they believe that it's the government, that one part of this is the government. And so it's horrifying, right? It's horrifying to think that that's happening, but that it's all being done supposedly even legally, right, for studying the phenomenon and studying the NHI. So I have a problem with all of it, actually, because I think that it's not only consent, it's like violations, right? Physical, mental, emotional, and being violated, and then being left with having no answers to any questions at all. And so I think that's why I have such a hard time with that part of the field of study, is because it's all unethical, it's all horrifying. And to be knowing that the MyLab phenomena is real for me now is even taken me many years to process and absorb and to come to grips with it, because so many people have similar experiences. So I don't know how you feel about that, Deb, about, the MyLab part of it. We've never really talked about that, but I imagine you probably don't,
We're going to bring that to the table. But before we do, and Anon ET, by the way, mentioned MyLabs in the chat. Hi, Anon. I just wanted to say, before we bring MyLabs out and some of the things that are behind that, I wanted to mention the consent part, that even if we were in some way giving consent to these entities, it's sort of like getting consent from a drunk person, because we hear about them manipulating people with a sense of
true. That is such a good point.
Right. Like they get like people this wave of euphoria, right? And I'm like, that's manipulation. Like we don't know, like they're suddenly feeling really happy to see this giant ship over their house. I'm like, no, something's not right there. Like they manipulate, because it's not that actually hard to do. Like they do that now with a type of therapy that's like a magnetic wand that they put over someone's head. And imagine having greater technology. Like you can easily manipulate people if you know how to do it. So it's scary. So,
and I want to go a step farther, Deb. If you don't mind. This is something that just really gets in my craw a lot. And I am going to be controversial in saying this, but we're all women here, so we have a stake in this. And nobody ever talks about it, but I think it's time we finally start, especially as women, like spearheading some of this together. And I didn't think this would come up, but it's a good segue. And nobody has to make a comment on this. It's just something that I've been really upset with lately, is I hear Danny Sheehan, on the circuit, in the podcast circuit, talking about disclosure and talking about, our intergalactic family and being part of citizens, right, of this larger universe. And one of the things that crops up periodically, is that he's talking about abductions. And he talks about how if women were allowed to give their material, right, give their give their material, then a lot of these abductions might not happen anymore because they're giving consent to give their reproductive material, and men too. And he speaks about it in a way that's like, we're already there, for one, which gives me a real strong gut, no. And then the second is that, we should be allowed to talk about this, right? Women should be allowed to have a vote and discuss this. I mean, we live in a democracy, for goodness sake. We're very lucky for that. But when I hear those concepts come up, like if women and men just were giving their reproductive material, we wouldn't be in this situation anymore. I also think that needs to be discussed, especially by women. So that's one of the things that I've been discouraged by recently on the podcast circuit when it comes up and there's no women in the room or on the podcast talking about this or addressing it. So you guys don't have to comment on it, but it's just something I see, like a wave happening in the sound bites and stuff. And
I can't speak to it personally, Courtney. But I can tell you, my close friend who's an abductee is a male, but one of the things they struggled with was intimate relationships with women, especially during the woman's reproductive years, because it would impact them and they would have visitations. And sorry. So it is something, that even is in men's conscious awareness. I'm sure experiencers may have thought about that, and nobody's really talking about it.
And there's also the equation where women are introduced to beings that are supposed to be their children. I haven't heard a lot of cases of men being introduced to those children, and it doesn't go well. And it's almost treated like an experiment. And can you imagine, like, I don't have this experience, but can you imagine being introduced to a child that you're not raising and that you're actually afraid of and may have somewhat scary abilities, but still be partly human and want you to take care of them, but not be able to express? Like, it's so complicated, right? Imagine you're introduced to that kid and then you're like taken away.
I think that's the horror behind it. I think, honestly, that's the horror behind it that I have the most fear-inducing, like, response about, and I can be honest about that's part of it that I've always just been the most tenuous about of all.
And Krys, you were muted, but I saw you trying to chime in on that.
No, I can see that as being very difficult and dark. And I think I can understand, I guess, having a little bit of that fear, because after, my recent experiences, you start to think back over your life. And the one thing that I know is that I used to have reoccurring nightly paralysis and hear footsteps coming upstairs to my room. And then I would black out and I don't remember anything else. And that was happening quite frequently. And I was pretty young at that time. I was in the Navy but it totally left my memory. I mean, I talked about it very actively when it was happening with my husband and my family because it was scaring me, but I didn't have any connection. So now I look back, and that is something I do think about, like, what, was something happening that I don't know about? And I think obviously there's more fear in that unknown, because my husband was leaving. He was gone. He would go to work at 1 a.m. at that time. So it was like me alone at home and hearing these footsteps come up, and then I'd black out. So I don't know if there's anything to it, but I think that maybe I do shut down on some of those thoughts.
Yeah, to give a shout out to Geraldine, who did a movie about this. I think it was called The Seeding. I've spoken to her before, and that's a brave move to come out and just put this out in the open, that this is an issue that some experiencers are talking about. And it's a whole ball of wax that we're not actually bringing out into the community and dealing with. Like, that's traumatic. And on a personal level, I did try to meditate on this, and I was kind of like given the impression that these are not children that you can nurture. Like they are as needy as a human, but they can manipulate and control you. And can you imagine even a human child being like that, that has like special telepathic abilities and can manipulate? Like that's horrific. It was. You're muted again, Krys.
Sorry, I'm worried about the dogs. No, yeah, that's hard to imagine, to be honest.
I guess I would ask Danny Sheehan. I mean, so he's saying that if we just had the ability and freedom to give our material for them, they would not abduct us. But I mean, to what end? I mean, what woman is going to want to give that to them if they're creating a hybrid race that's going to like eventually take over the planet? You know, that's one of the theories. So I would say, how is that any better? I mean, I guess you're not being violated and invaded at that point, but it still wouldn't be like the end product would still not be okay, right? I'm confused why
it comes up in context with the agreements that were signed. This is the context and how it comes up, and then how he segues into, if we had, the choice to give it, people would give it over. He goes from the agreements that were signed with our government, potentially, with another species that we're still waiting for disclosure on, and then he goes from that potential executive order that was signed that we're working with them. And so if we've been working with them, the abductions are being taken place essentially underneath that agreement and that historical, essentially understanding or partnership between these groups. And then that's how abductions are made possible. So then he talks about, if we were to change this and disclosure happens and those agreements are made public and people understand what's been going on, then he goes into, well, then we could have potentially, people possibly giving their reproductive material in order to, prevent abduction style harvesting or gathering of reproductive material. So that's how he kind of strings it together in context like that. And in a sense, you could see, okay, yeah, well, that would make sense. But my problem with it is that we need to get through, essentially, if that is to happen, a truth and reconciliation process with our own government about the fact that it's happened in the first place.
Yep.
And then we should be able to decide, rather than just proposing that as a potential alternative without even discussing that, especially with the people who have been harmed in the past by this program.
I have to say, there are people who would do it 100%. That is correct. Like, I was watching a documentary recently about some guy who has an enormous amount of children because he was cheating the system. I think it was in Norway, going around to different places to have, and not charging, by the way. He wanted to have like hundreds of children for some reason. So there are people who would do it. And I'm thinking also of the lady in Independence Day who went on the roof with the sign. She probably would have volunteered too, but that was a movie. And in reality, that's not what's happening right now. People aren't being asked, and it's not voluntary. And I think of a story in RD6 Killer Clark's investigations where she asked people what happened to them, and one lady said she had to talk to these entities and say, I don't want to do this, but they kind of made a deal with her and said, well, stop when you're like 25. But it wasn't like, we're stopping now when you don't want to do it, we're going to keep going. And Whitley Strieber also talked about how damaging it was for him when that particular aspect was part of his experience. Like, he's mortified that people made fun of what happened to him. It was not voluntary. So I'm going to switch gears if I can. I'm going to talk about my labs. Not an easier topic, by the way. But I just, before I throw this around for us to chat about this, I want to bring up two things. One, that some of these experiences with people who appear to be dressed as soldiers indicate that these soldiers may not actually be conscious when they're participating in this. So they may not be the
Aware.
villains. They may actually also be victims because there's stories about people seeing soldiers lined up and they are in a trance.
Hmm.
So it's not just they're coming in and grabbing people, they're completely not aware of what's happening. And then the second piece was Rick Doty mentioned in the documentary that he did that some of these um, quote abductions are actually happening to fake people out. They're not actual abductions. So both things are happening in
Right.
addition to, what other people are reporting. So let's see what people want to add to that. You want to go first, Ariel? I'm just randomly picking.
I mean, I would not be surprised to find out that, like you said, that they were under some sort of trance, some sort of drug, some sort of manipulation, that they too were a victim. Just thinking about, like, about a month ago, my daughter sleptwalk, and she sleptwalked all the way downstairs, and she had no idea the next morning, but she was in control to an extent, but she didn't know what she was doing at the time, and she couldn't remember. So, I just don't think that would be very hard to replicate. But I think that's interesting and important to consider as something that could be going on. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Krys, you want to go next?
Yeah, I haven't heard too much about the program specifically. I know my understanding is that these are usually typically abductees, right? And then the military somehow comes back and also abducts them and then tests them to see what or whatever they're doing. I'm assuming testing them is and obviously under some sort of covert operation. I don't really know of anyone. I haven't really spoken to anyone who's had that experience, but I have spoken to people who've had definite like intimidation tactics by the military after being, an abductee, following, tracking, other things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me that it's going on.
Isn't that what Carla Turner spoke about? Do you know, she was an abduction researcher, and I think she spoke a lot about the military involvement, and I think she said something like she felt like the military involvement and what they did to her and her family was worse than the abductions themselves.
Well, Krys, I think you were there for this. I think we were in the room together down at Contact in the Desert, and we were there. Were you there for the women's panel? Because I thought I saw you. Okay. Well, Yvonne Smith talked about this, and she said that she's seeing a recent phenomenon in her practice where she's noticing a lot more abductions recently, even in the last few months. And so there is this idea, out in the community that abductions used to happen in the 70s, and hit a peak and then, waned. But she said that's not the case, that she's seeing a lot more. So I'm not, like commenting on the first question, but I'm wondering, Deb, like, has anybody heard what Yvonne, because she says she has a new hypothesis about this. Has anybody heard what her new hypothesis is, or is that too new of a research area?
I don't think she even mentioned it to me when I spoke to her. No, it's too new.
No, but I think, just tying in some of these loose pieces on abductions, like the missing 411. And I just, Native American women, I just feel like there's got to be a tie in to where they're going. How is nobody reporting them missing? How are they I just don't understand some of these missing person cases. And it does make me think that there's, and I don't know if it's government or, NHI, but there's some sort of connection, I think.
My sister's always constantly reminding 7,000 people missing in national parks every year.
Yeah, it's ridiculous if you go
Pretty
look
staggering number.
Yeah, if you go look at a missing persons page, it's extremely depressing. It's like all ages. It's clearly not just, obviously there's some cases that involve human trafficking, but why would they take people who are a certain age and beyond for human trafficking? Like, that's not what's happening to them, right? It's just excessive. And it gets into really dark things. So I'm trying to switch gears again because I don't want us to go there too much. I don't even want to talk about it, but Report 13 keeps going through my head. Why isn't that one out in the public yet? From Blue Book. Have you guys heard about that?
No, tell us.
Oh, it's supposedly, if you look at the sequence with Blue Book, 14 is the one that's out in public. And then you go back, you see, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, but 13's missing. And I'm like, that's not like when they used to make elevators and being superstitious, right? It's missing for a reason. There's a rumor, and some people have said they've seen it, that it goes into really dark things that have happened to humans,
Hmm.
and that it may eventually come out.
Oh, wow.
Were you suspecting, Deb, along with that rumor, with the other rumor that we heard that some classified Project Blue Book files might come out in the declassification through the archiving process, or is that separate?
It may be. It may be that's where 13 is, right? And super classified. Because if you guys have read Rubolt's book, he said that some files he couldn't even process. They couldn't even investigate. They took them from him. He also said that others that involved, you know, entities often got tossed in the trash, that they didn't want to talk about it. He definitely didn't really get to investigate a lot of those, right? So yeah, it's pretty much a trend you notice in looking at FOIA's Blue Book, that's minimized.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
think it's ongoing. I mean, I know you guys know this, but at the Soul Symposium, that was one of the things that was told to Whitley Strieber, because he wanted to be able to talk, right, about his experience and being an experiencer and being someone in this field for so long, raising awareness about these topics. And he was just told, look, it's not palatable for DC. We're not even bringing up experiencer issues. And so it's ongoing, right? I mean, we're still
Yeah.
experiencing this moratorium on experiencer issues, but I think that's really where the battle is at, to be honest.
Yep.
Is the human encounters.
Right. I think it's also something Courtney and I've worked on before, is just trying to prepare people for this reality, because at some point in time, like I still know people who do not believe that there could be life on other planets. Like,
Right.
they cannot wrap their brain around that. And there's people who don't understand that we're already hybrid humans. And I'm not talking about necessarily NHI. I'm saying we have multiple types of humanoids in our blood right now. And like, they can't understand that we used to coexist next to other intelligent beings. Like, there's this huge ego thing that, like, they just can't grasp it. Like, you see people resisting AI intelligence, and it freaks them out if it, like, the AI looks human,
Yeah.
so I can't imagine. So that's something we're concerned about too, is just getting everyone on board and ready.
And how do you do that? It's like this impossible task of like, I don't even know, because I mean, I talk about it obviously regularly, and I have family members, mom, don't talk to me about this. I don't, and the things you mentioned, the going through the walls, and female issues, those are all the things that scare her, as they should. And so, but then what do I say? Because in a weird way, I do feel that some of my experiences were positive. Not necessarily like I didn't have an encounter with a being, and I didn't have, anything traumatic like that happen to me. So I can't speak like other people, but I feel like the process that happened to me as a result of the sightings and as a result of my encounters, the change in my consciousness, and the shift in like how I see the world, and that is the part that I think I value out of the whole thing, even though it was very painful going through it. There's something about it I value, I think. So it's kind of hard not to talk about it.
Right. I feel like I'm thinking about David Grush talking about like this huge psyop that has happened with us, right? Like as a society, and you see it all the time. Here's an example. My dad used to work at the Pentagon. So I asked him, "Hey, Dad, can you tell me about those underground bases? I'm just curious." And he's like, "Of course we have underground bases." And then he said, "We have to stop talking about this. You're going to ruin your career." Like he has never said that this is real. Like, of course not, right? But he has definitely said this is career ending conversations. And then 10, 15 minutes later, my sister was talking about a ghost tour, and he was all in on that conversation. That's a weird psychology thing. What about the conversation we just had outside about UFOs? Why is that a career ending conversation, but we're cool with ghost? Like everyone's cool with ghost tours, right? That's a public thing. If we had like Melinda Leslie's tour everywhere in every town, like we have ghost tours,
Yeah,
would we be cool?
probably not.
I'm thinking of turning my Montana property into the Montana UFO ranch. Basically, because Melinda was like, anybody can do this. But I just want to say this before we move on. Jeb, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember us having a conversation about how your dad kind of came around, didn't he? Or he's at least willing to be more open about it with you, wasn't he? Like down the
Well, he
line?
gave me a UFO book, which frankly,
Okay.
I haven't done a
All
lot
right.
of reading lately. He gave me a UFO book. That was him coming around. The rest of my family still treats it kind of like a joke. They just give me alien gifts. They don't know that I actually appreciate them. And I decorate my house with some of them, but they aren't taking it seriously, and they're so interested in NASA and all of that. It's fascinating to me that they're not open to this idea. So there's a weird psychology. And another example of this weird psychology that I can't get over is someone is always very, very credible. Like everyone's respecting them and like have great esteem for them until they talk about this topic. And then suddenly all of that credibility apparently disappears. And it's so weird to me. So, what do you guys think about this psyop, weird psychology, movie manipulation that also happens thanks to the CIA, et cetera, that we're all dealing with?
I when you said weird psychology, I think this is one of the things that we should mention, and I hope I'm not taking it off topic, but one of the things that I've found the most fascinating is in talking to an abductee and to talking to like Travis Walton. I sat down with him for like an hour at one of the conferences, and one of the things that I do find fascinating is this idea of the initial trauma of the situation, but the later endearment that is built. And again, maybe that is manipulation. That could be some curious what your guys' thoughts on that. And also, but so there's this weird psychology thing. I mean, is it what's that syndrome called when somebody abducts you and
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm. I mean, could it be that? Could it be? I mean, because they'll legitimately tell you they even appreciate the experience, but the thing that traumatizes them now is the stigma and the public response and the military response. So I'm just curious about that. Sorry.
No, I agree. Because if we didn't respond that way, and if we let these people talk, and it wasn't snickers in the audience or snickers by someone talking to them, it would not be traumatic. And actually, that is what I've done with some of my clients. I just let them talk and then we move on. They tell me about experiences that they have. And a lot of them are kids, and they just talk about them. I don't tell them about my interests. I don't tell them my point of view. I just let them talk. And then 5 minutes later, we're talking about a video game or something. It's not traumatic at that point if you just let them speak. But the snickers, the stigma, yeah, it continues. Ariel, what did you, or Courtney, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to say that I was just watching this morning. I saw something on X about Elon Musk's patient who had the Neuralink, and he was talking to Chris Cuomo, and he's into UFOs and UAPs. And so he was talking about his perspective on it, what's happening. And don't you know, Chris Cuomo comes out and says, well, look, there are some people that I can't exactly what he said, but he threw in the little green man. He had to do it. He threw the little green man into the
I know.
narration. And I thought, man, we're beyond that. Like, just leave the little green man behind, or the tinfoil hats, or whatever stigmifying thing you're going to say next. And I wish we could just drop all that now. And I think that just shows us we're not there yet. That's all I wanted to say about the op.
I did see that.
It's been very effective.
Very effective.
Ariel?
I find that very interesting, because in the context of like personal conversations with family and friends, it's like people can kind of, be more open to it. Like I feel like I don't get the snickers. I get more just the kind of like, oh, that's nice. That's nice. So that's interesting. That's nice. And then move on. I don't get like, you're weird or, any of that. But when it comes to media, we still have these news anchors just pushing the stigma, like you said, throwing in the tinfoil hat comments and the green little men comments. And it drives me crazy, because I just don't know if that's representative of what's going on in people's like personal conversations. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm just going to say this. Like, I started from a point of research, and just reading the investigations that were happening. Like, the Army has a PDF that a lot of people don't read. It was fascinating. That was like real life movie stuff right there. They went all over Germany trying to figure out if the Germans were doing the flying saucers that were being reported. And it was right after Kenneth Arnold sighting, and they took it really seriously. There was like page after page of all these things that they did to investigate. And I'm like, that's serious stuff. That's not joking stuff. Like, that was manpower and money and woman power, going out there trying to figure out what was going on. And those stories are being missed. They're missing them because they're not paying attention. Another one that's fascinating was that someone who worked for the US Air Force tried desperately in the 50s to have the public know more about this topic. And she wrote to people talking about the US Air Force wants to come out and open to the public information about this topic. And guess who stopped them? Guess who stopped the US Air Force? It was the CIA.
Mm.
That's real stuff that happened. And the media is missing it because they're making jokes. There was also stuff that scandals about people lying, and politicians, and things the politicians were doing with their money, which was really interesting actually. There was a whole article about someone who worked for a senator, and senators that created conventions. Like, they spent their money on that. It was Pell, by the way, who did that, in part. He wasn't the only one. I think like Rockefeller and some other people were involved. But, these are really interesting, real things that happen, and people just want to make jokes. And it leads down to like, oh, seriously bad things that people did. Oh, I found out about Japan and MacArthur, and we made a deal to cover up the experiments that they did on people that were horrific. And that's a real thing that happened. And the media never reports on that. And they just made that deal so that we could get the data from it and let all those people off the hook. So, yeah, Courtney, I could tell you wanted to chime in. Go ahead.
No, we only have a couple minutes left. And so I want to make sure we give enough time because I have some comments to say in the goodbye part. So I'll go ahead and pass it back to you.
Okay. Well, I guess since we do have to wrap up, if you would like, could you please tell us what's going to happen in the future with your show? Because I'm sure people are going to want to chime in.
Go ahead, Krys. Gotcha.
We're just plugging along, doing what we're doing. We try and have a show every couple weeks, and depending on schedules and things. So we just dropped an episode today with the Ancient Enigma Files, and it was a really fun episode. Actually, talk a lot about Christianity, religion, some beliefs that he holds on, just different theories. It was a really good full topic. And then we have I think Joel is going to come on in August, and we have another deep dive we're going to do at the end of August. So we're going to bring on actually a couple of brothers, is what I understand, and they are going to deep dive a case with us. So that'll be fun. And then we have some really cool stuff in September. So Ariel's got the in on a really big name on simulation theory. So I don't even know why I'm going to be on the show just to listen, because I probably can't even have a dialogue.
It's going to be fun.
You need to start searching for Mandela effects in your life so that you can ask your host about your Mandela effect experiences.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that tip.
Good tip. Good tip. Yeah. Do you want to give Do you want to give the address of our YouTube channel? You're muted.
I think Julia's put it in the chat at least once.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I always get confused. It's the Elephant in the Room 411. I don't remember if it's Elephant in the Room 411 on YouTube. And you can find Ariel and myself on X most of the time. That's pretty much where we're at. And Ariel's on Instagram, so she'll post some updates and things there. So we're just kind of taking it easy and slow and doing it at our own pace as I'm going to school, and Ariel's going to be busy in this fall as well. So
yeah, but thank you so much for having us on. I have been wanting to meet the both of you for so long now, and just getting to, put faces and voices with names and just kind of getting to know your personalities. This has just been so much fun. So just really appreciate it.
Well, I will say before Courtney gets to say goodbye that I think we're going to need a part 2 at some point, because I am thinking we need to talk more about women in this community and some of the issues that we're looking at, because it isn't a topic that is addressed nearly enough. I can tell you there are some podcasts that I stopped watching because I never saw them interview a woman ever. Yep. And there's plenty of women doing this work behind the scenes, besides the people like Sheehan. There were women working with him, and we're not seeing them. So yeah, definitely should talk about that some more in the future. Your turn, Courtney. What you got?
Krys, I just want to say, and you probably don't remember this, but I have a really good memory. When you came into the mothership, the women's research group that we did, so all the women in the field who were available could highlight their work. One of the things that Deb and I noticed was that it really quickly got into experiencer issues. It was like we had a couple people come in, share their work, do their introduction, and then it was like heavy with experiencer issues. And so I just want to say this to you because it's something that I remember. One of the participants was a husband who had experiences that didn't believe in his wife's experiences, and then he did eventually, and he was really struggling with that. And I remember kind of addressing it, but then moving on to the next person for time. And I just want to say that you really addressed his issues, and gave him a lot of positive feedback and support. And I wanted to thank you for that. And I know that you're not like an experience or support person, or not running the groups or anything, but I saw that in you. And I thought, wow, that's remarkable that she took the time to address this person's real feelings and offered support and help, and even said there's a lot of great people in this community that will help you. So I learned from that. And that was just you being present and aware and really listening to what was needed and providing it. So I've followed you guys since. and all your work. And I just want to say, keep doing the good work. I love that you guys are on Twitter and you don't get into the Twitter wars. You're very balanced and even. And Ariel, that's what I wanted to say to you. You seem to be able to stay out of the fray and keep it classy. And I really like that about you, you know, but you continue to do good work. So both of you, I regard you very highly, and keep up all the good work that you're doing in the field. It makes a difference.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really nice of you to notice. Thank you so much.
And thank you from myself as well. I think that some people probably really appreciated this conversation today, and the fact that we touched on some things that maybe don't regularly get touched on and should be. And I'm hoping that more people will go check out your channel and absorb all the information that you have, including some presentations. I saw that there are some presentations. People come prepared to your channel with presentations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you again from all of us at
guys.
CAB. Thank you for writing in the CAB today. And to everyone who came to listen, thank you, and have a wonderful, wonderful night.
Oh, love you, ladies. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Bye.